Okay. Basically, as I was going through and looking at the questions, I kind of divided it up into three categories. There's some that are specific questions about the practice, the teaching and practice of the Mormon Church, and some that are personal to Jerry about Mormonism and why, well, specifically why he left the Mormon Church, and then others that are questions that have to do with perceived contradictions between Mormonism and the Bible, or Mormonism and Mormonism. So I'm just going to kind of go through and pick and choose. Okay, this one has to do with Mormon practice. We had a couple of these. This was addressed to Marshall. Marshall, why can't just anyone go into a Mormon temple?
Why can't anyone just go into a Mormon temple? It's really because the Mormons own it, and they make the rules. So, you know, it's like in your house, you kind of make the rules. Well, they make their rules, and they say you have to be worthy to go in the temple. You have to show up in front of your bishop and maybe another counselor, I think it is, something like that. You have two interviews, and one is usually with your bishop. And he asks you questions about your worthiness to see if you are an upright citizen and you're doing the gospel works that you're called of God to do, and they have a calling that they do. And so if you refuse enough callings, you probably won't get a temple recommend. If you don't do your tithing, you probably won't get a temple recommend. And then if you're cussing, swearing, drinking Coke, or going with girls that do, you probably won't get a temple recommend. So I know some Mormons today, I know one at least in Richland, who it was not forthright about things that he does that is a sin, and he didn't tell his bishop, and he has still got a current temple recommend, although he's doing things that would disqualify him. And we talked about that, and he says, yeah, I know if I told the bishop what I do, I wouldn't have this recommend, so I never tell him. So it's not like it's something that is miraculous and it's foolproof, like some people claim. There are those who slip through the cracks just like anything else. So.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I add one thing to that?
Yeah.
You either go to the temple to obtain, to get the priesthood or practice it. In other words, and a lot of times the male will go through the temple to get, before he goes to the temple, he'll get the priesthood, the Melchizedek priesthood, so he can take his wife to the temple to marry. The things that happen after that are ordinances that are required the priesthood in order to do. A normal person wouldn't have anything to do there, and I'm not going to tell you what's going on there because I've basically made a promise, and there's sometimes I won't bring that up. Okay, kids go to that to be baptized for their ancestors, and you return to the temple to be married for your ancestors. That's the basic of what goes on in there. So you have to have a recommendation to do these holy things in their eyes, and I'll give them that. You know. I guess that's not an issue with me.
Okay.
If you want to know what goes on in the temple, there's a booklet you can get a hold of that does tell the things that Jerry has promised not to tell. So it is out there for people who did tell.
All right. This is for Jerry. Jerry, why did you leave the Mormon Church?
After tons of studying, which was like, well, we figured out we studied about 6 hours together a day. Our job allowed us to take breaks, study before, forget lunch, after work, go home and study in the middle of the night. And so we studied for about 3 months. It wasn't something I did overnight. It wasn't something flippant. And after Marshall offended me by this awful picture of the Bunt Church, which is on a dead-end street, I was going to baptize him. It was the last thing I do. So it was a challenge. But what we did do was narrow the topics. We did a good job of narrowing the topic, and we discussed the gods of Mormonism and the God of Christianity. Though they had the same names, it took me a long time to learn that they're not. I was taught that the God of Mormonism was a better description of the God of Christianity, and that we just knew more about him, and the Christians knew a little bit, we knew a lot. What I studied and learned was that the God of Mormonism is, and the God of generic Christianity, not to offend the Mormons, is the idea that they are diametrically opposed. One cannot exist in the same plane. They have opposite attributes. One has been around forever. One used to be a man. Okay, one is all powerful, one's still learning, and the Christ of Mormonism was a product of spiritual union in heaven, whereas, and you didn't used to be Christ or the Word, depending on how you want to look at it. But Christ was always the Word in Christianity. The Holy Spirit is another product of spiritual union in heaven, which is the brother of Jesus. Whereas, and so that's a three separate being, basically pluralism. They teach pluralism. They talk about that word. Some people don't like to admit that they're pluralistic, but there's too much of the doctrines the books say that they are. Whereas the Mormon Church believes in one God and one Trinity. There's one point.
Protestant Church.
The Protestant Church, yeah. There's one major point that is hard to get around. That is, if you obey the first commandment, you have no other gods before me. That means you guys are before me. Marshall's actually before me. Okay, people behind me are before me, all around me. If you obey the first commandment, you have no other gods before me. There's no other room for any other god. Not a pluralistic God, not this God's father who used to be a god, or who is now a god. This God's brother who is now a god, used to be a man, is now a god. The scriptures in the Book of Mormon don't back it up. The Bible, Isaiah chapter 43, chapter 44 and 45, doesn't back it up. It only backs up this one triune God. And many of the references to God, the only way you can make sense out of it is to be a Trinity. You can't make sense out of it as a pluralistic God. I had to choose. I went to the rest of the background and the foundation and found out that the foundation crumbled underneath the Mormon Church. And it was solid underneath the Bible-believing churches.
Okay. I wasn't just throwing away questions.
As we're going.
Yeah. As they answer them, I'm putting them down. Okay.